Genderlinks is leading the gender subgroup of the DFID PPA Gender Learning Partnership. In April 2012, through its Knowledge Production and Management Unit, the Gender and Media Diversity Center, Genderlinks convened a series of discussions on the topic Mainstreaming or Malestreaming, Gender at Work in Organizations. The discussions were aimed at coming up with a learning paper on the approaches that different organizations are using to mainstream gender in their work.
So here we are, all these different paths and roads bringing us here. But I think the one thing that certainly unites all of us in here is that at one time or the other, and hopefully in a very ongoing and a very dynamic way, we are asking ourselves, how do we go about mainstreaming gender in the work that we do? Number one. Number two, what kinds of tools are we using? And of course, thirdly, is this yielding results? Is it making a difference? Is it just a tick box that we do because the donors ask us to say gender mainstreaming, yes, we've done that.
It's like in South Africa, you can't talk of poverty and say that, hang on, white people are equally as poor as black people. You are historical. You'd in fact be falsifying history, because we know that poverty in this country has got a black face. And we know that violence in this country and throughout the world has got a woman face. So what we do with Sanke, why we're working with men is to ensure that the issues of when you sensitize men and to say that, but you know what, it can't be correct that the majority of the citizens of all the world, for that matter, remain oppressed, remain violated, and we say that we have uhuru or freedom. So, Colin, there is an element of acknowledging that this work may not succeed when we do not journey together. And like I said, some of us come from the liberation tradition that taught us that when you read the Freedom Charter of the ANC, which led to what we have now, the Constitution, it said somewhere, side by side, these freedoms will fight together. And it's on the basis of that we're doing the work we do in ensuring that we deal with the mindset, we deal with issues of culture, of tradition, where we continuously challenge men and say, but hang on, your silence should not be deafening. You should actually be raising your voice.
As feminists driving the women's rights agenda, we had to adjust some of our strategies because it was more of the dog bargaining. What we are focusing on ultimately as an organization is women's social and economic empowerment. So in order to achieve this, one of the main tools we are using to mainstream gender is gender budgeting. So we focus on the national budget, working with a number of government ministries as well as the Parliament of Zimbabwe, and we're also working at local government level in 6 local authorities. And then at the other level, we are also working with women in their communities to at least build their skills and strength in terms of demanding social and economic rights.
Isn't a term like gender budgeting. A council's budget is informed by the different policies. For instance, infrastructure is gender budgeting because you budget for EPWP projects which services women's programs and men's programs. So that's gender budgeting. Now in our council we budget for R1 million for skills development. We say that's gender budgeting because in that budget we're budgeting for women in construction, we're budgeting for women in leadership. But guess what? We're also budgeting for men to go on courses to become typists. That is gender budgeting. We've got one woman on our top management staff. That woman is the municipal manager. She's got more power than all the 6 other directors sitting around that table. Now the problem we're sitting with is, you don't see that as good gender management because you're looking for the numbers. Don't raise your voice. The women don't need to speak louder. Raise your argument.
I think what is important really is that you need to change mindsets. You are changing attitudes, and that is a process. It's not easy. When you start with the training, the awareness training, and you take everyone into one room, they are trained. Some pretend to understand, maybe because they want it to pass. Others are really convinced. The real work comes now when you get onto the ground. The implementation is always the challenge, because now you must put your shoulder to the wheel and make sure that everything is moving. And that is where we then encounter problems. But in the city of Harare, we have been fortunate that the champions are at the top, and that has made the work a bit easier to convince others and to make sure that they follow. We have not made many strides in terms of the results, because I think some of the things take time to change, but it's important in our view that you must institutionalize your efforts by coming up with policies. And once you have got the policies, you now need to implement them. When we look at changing policy, it's not something which you do overnight. You need to make sure that you have got the capacity in your management, the technical people, to carry out these gender audits. You need to have counsellors who are gender sensitive, who can then respond and approve these policies.
These are the 10 things I think that we have learned. The first thing we have learned is, if you're going to do gender mainstreaming, have a champion. You have to have a champion. There is no gender mainstreaming that I have seen that does not have a strong political champion, whether it's male or female, that has succeeded. Leadership from the front is absolutely key. Secondly, and I think it came up, you need to have a policy, and yes, Unity, it needs to be adopted, and it needs to sit with all the other policies. And the policy, the gender policy, two things. You need to have a gender policy, standalone, visible, but it also needs to be cross-referenced with every other policy. Thirdly, what we have learned is you need to have targets and timeframes. Sari has referred to the protocol. The reason we hang on to it, and the reason we are taking it to the local level, and the reason that the local action plans are aligned to the protocol, is this is one sub-regional agreed instrument that has 28 specific targets to be achieved by 2050. Fourthly, we have learned that gender action plans are no good unless they are costed. We have learned that if you do your gender mainstreaming well, and this goes to the heart of what Chipiwa was saying, if you do it well, your budget is actually like a mirror, it's a test. Because if you have done all your mainstreaming and made sure that women and men are equal beneficiaries of all your programs, then your budget is going to reflect that. The gender budgeting must work hand in hand with gender disaggregated data. Because if you don't have the disaggregated data, indeed, my friend at the back there, it will be a budget for infrastructure, but infrastructure for who and who is being employed. Then we've got to put on our gender spectacles and look at that program and say, okay, we've got Soccer 2010, you know, in the city of Johannesburg, and there's billions of rands worth of contracts being handed out. But who is receiving those contracts, and how many women and how many men are benefiting? Then the lights go on. We've also learned that we need to be able to understand gender mainstreaming internally as well as externally. Within, you know, it's the simple principle that we must practice what we preach. So we must start within our own institutions, our staff. Is there gender violence in our workplace? How do we go out there and preach, you know, gender equality to the rest of the world if there's sexual harassment taking place, for instance, in our own workplace? We need then also to understand that gender mainstreaming is not just about what we do internally, but about the services we deliver. Every organization exists to do a job. And this is not just about jobs for the girls, as I keep saying in our work in local government. It is about gender equality for our nations. And if we end up saying, yeah, we've now got you know, half women in the council, yay, that's not good enough. Having half women in the council doesn't really help us. We have to see that in gender responsive service delivery. That's what it's about.
Through this process, GenderLinks has managed to fine-tune its theory of change. The theory of change defines all building blocks required to bring about a given long-term goal. A Southern Africa in which women and men are able to participate fully in private and public life, in line with the provisions of the SADC Protocol on Gender and Development.